Hello guys, welcome back to another Android Studio tutorial. In the last episode, we already learned about how to send push notification using Firebase console. In this episode, I am going to show you how to send push notification from your app server using Firebase. So start a new Android Studio project, specify your application name, select an empty activity. Okay, now the project is ready. So first here I am going to add Firebase to this application. So go to manifest folder, open manifest file, copy your application package name. Now go to Firebase console. Go to the console. Okay, here I am going to use an existing Firebase project. Select a project and add Firebase to your Android app. Here you need to provide your application package name. Soon after submit your package name, you will get a JSON configuration file. Go to the download folder, copy that JSON configuration file. Now go to Android Studio, change this one into project view. You need to place that JSON configuration file within this app folder. Okay, now we need to add some dependency and plugins. Now change this one into Android. Now again go to Firebase console and click continue. Now you need to copy this dependency and plugins. So here copy this line, copy this dependency. Now go to Android Studio and open your project level Gradle script file. Now add the dependency here. Now again go to console. Now copy this plugin for Google Play service. Copy this plugin. Now open your module level Gradle script file. Add that line at the bottom of this file. Okay. So now in order to use Firebase, you need to add the needed library. So go to Firebase document. At the bottom of this page, here is the available Firebase libraries. So here we need to use cloud messaging and notifications. So copy this line, copy this dependency. Now compile that one. Okay, now here we add all the needed dependency and plugins. So now make a project sync. Okay, now the project sync finishes successfully. Now we need to set up our application server. So here we are going to send push notification from our own application server. So now this is the time to set up the application server. So here I am going to use a WAMP server application. So here the app server is a local host. So go to the installation folder of WAMP server. Go to the root directory. Create a new folder. Specify folder name as FCM test. Now open your favorite text editor. Now open your browser. Start WAMP server. Okay, now the WAMP server is ready. Now on the address bar type localhost. Go to PHP myadmin. So here we need to create a new database. So create a new database, specify your database name, FCMDB, create it. Now create a new table with a table name FCM info. Here we need only one column. We have to save FCM registration token. So we need only one column and click go. Now specify the column name. Here the column name is FCM token. Specify the data type. Here the data type is varchar. Now specify the size as 400 and click save. Okay, now the database and table is ready. Okay, now we need to add the needed PHP script. So open your favorite text editor. So now I'm going to add a PHP script. So change language into PHP. Now save it. Save it inside the root directory of ARM server. And there we create a new folder called FCM test with PHP script name init.php. So now here I am going to add some PHP script. So the purpose of this PHP script is to establish connection to the database. So here we have variables like host name, a DB user, DB password, and here is our database name. And here we establish connection to the database using this function called MySQLi connect. You have to pass your host name, database username, and database password, and your database name. So here we check the connection using an if-else statement. So this is the PHP script that establish connection. So now save the file. Now we can test that PHP script. Localhost. Our folder name is FCM test and the file name is init.php, and it shows connection success. That means we successfully connected to the database. So now we need to add another PHP script for save the FCM token to the table. We have to get FCM token from the Android application and we have to save it inside the database. So create a new PHP script with file name FCM insert. Save it. Okay, here I add the needed PHP script. So first here we need to establish connection to the database. So we add that file init.php, and here we get the FCM token from the Android application. Here we use the HTTP post method, and here the token name is FCM token. And here is the SQL statement for add information to the table, insert into FCM info values, FCM token. And here we execute that SQL query using function MySQLi query. And finally, we close the connection. So this PHP script add information to the database. Save it. Now we need to send push notification from your app server to the Firebase server. So we have to create another PHP script for it. So create another PHP script with file name send notification. Save it. Okay, here I add some PHP script. Here also we have to establish connection to the database, and here we have two variables called message and title. So here we get some message and title from an external HTML page. So here we use the HTTP post method with identifier message and title. So this is the message and title for our push notification. Okay, and here is the Firebase server URL. We have to send push notification to this URL. Okay, And here is your server key. You have to obtain your server key from Firebase console. Okay, I will show you. So inside Firebase console, here is a settings option. Select the settings, project settings, and here is a cloud message tab. You have to select that one, and here is your server key. So you have to copy the server key and place in your app server. Do not paste this server key inside your Android application. So you have to copy this server key and you have to place your server key here. You need to add your server key here. So the first thing, we have to get FCM token from the database table. So here is the SQL statement for get token from the database, and we execute that query using MySQLi query, and we get the row by using this function MySQLi fetch row, and finally we get the FCM token within this variable called key. Okay, so now we need to create an HTTP request, and we have to pass that HTTP request to the Firebase server. So the request need two sections, an header section and a payload section. So here we are going to place the push notification within the payload section. So first, here I am going to add the header section for the HTTP request. Okay, here is the header section of the HTTP request. So this is an array contain two field, authentication key. Here you have to place your server key. So here the server key available on this variable called the server key, and you have to specify the content type. Here the content type is JSON data. So the content type is application JSON. So this is the header section of the HTTP request. Now we have to specify the payload section. So here is the payload field. It is an array contain field like 2. Here you have to place your FCM registration token, and here is the notification section. The notification section again contain an array with the two field, title and body. Here is the title and body for the push notification. So this is the payload section. So when you perform a JSON encoding on this array, it will create some JSON data, two JSON objects. So the first JSON objects with the properties like to and notification, and second JSON object with the properties like title and body, title and message. So if you perform a JSON encoding on that array, here is the output. So here it will pass two JSON object with the properties like to and notification, and second JSON object with the properties title and body. Okay, so now we have to perform the JSON encoding on this variable. So here we perform JSON encoding and save it inside the variable called payload. So now we need to pass this information to the Firebase server. So here I am going to use the client URL for sending HTTP request. So first I have to start a client URL section. So here I add a client URL section. So CURL section is equal to call a function called init, CURL init. This will start a new session. Now we have to set options for the CURL. So here I add all the needed options for CURL. So first you have to specify the URL. Here I specify the URL. Now here we use the HTTP post method. So specify the HTTP post into true, and here I set the header section of the request and pass the header section variable, and specify the return transfer into true, verify peer into false, and CURL IP resolve into IPv4, and finally we set the payload field for the request and we pass the payload field. So now we need to execute this CURL. Okay, here I execute the CURL by calling a function called execute. So here we pass the HTTP request, that means our push notification to the Firebase server. Now we have to close the CURL. Okay, here I close the client URL section and I close the MySQL connection. Okay, so here you need to place this one. You have to provide your application actual server key here. So here I place a simple HTML form called the send notification. I will show you the form. So this is a simple HTML form with action send notification.php and with two field title and message. So you can send push notification to your app server using this HTML form. So I will show you the HTML form. Send notification. And here is the HTML form. You can send push notification to your app server using this form. You have to provide title and message for the notification. Okay, now the server side is ready. Now we can start with the Android application. Okay, now we can start coding of the Android application. So the first thing, we have to send our Firebase token to the application server. So here I'm going to use the Volley library for sending FCM token to the app server. So the first thing, I have to add the needed dependency for using Volley. So copy this dependency. Now go to the Gradle file, module level Gradle file, and add the dependency for using Volley. Now make a project sync. Okay, now the project sync finishes. Now here I am going to use a singleton pattern for using Volley. So I have to create a class for singleton. So create a new Java class with the class name mySingleton. And here we have to create some variables. Private static mySingleton m instance. Now create another variable for context. I name it as mctx. Now create some request queue variable, private request queue. I name it as request queue. So first here I am going to create a method that will return a request queue. So private, here the return type is request queue and method name is get request queue. So here check some condition. If the request queue is null, in that case we need to initialize the request queue. So request queue equal to volley dot new request queue and specify the context mctx dot get application context, and finally return the request queue from this method. We return the request queue. Okay, now I'm going to add a constructor for this class. So private mySingleton, and for this constructor we need one argument, one parameter. It's a context. Now initialize the context variable mctx is equal to context. Also we need to initialize the request queue. Request queue equal to get the request queue. Now we need to create another method that will return an instance of this class. So public, here the return type is public static synchronized, and return type is an object of this class, and the method name is get instance. For this method we need one parameter. It's a context variable. Here check some condition. If instance is already null, in that case we have to initialize an instance. So instance equal to new my singleton and pass the context. Return the instance from here, return instance. Okay, now we need to add another method for add the request to the request queue. So public void add it to request queue, and here there is only one parameter, it is the request. Now get the request queue, so call the method get the request queue and now add it to the request queue. Okay, now we need to get the FCM registration token and send the FCM token to the application server. In order to get the FCM token, you have to create a service that extends Firebase instance ID service. So create a new Java class with the class name FCM instance ID service. And this extends Firebase instance ID service. So for get the most recent version of registration token, you need to override a method called onTokenRefresh. So whenever a new token is generated, this method will invoke. So here create a variable called string recent token. Firebase instance ID dot get instance dot get token. Okay, now I'm going to save this recent token in shared preference. So before going to start shared preference, I need to create some string resources. So go to strings.xml and add some string resources. Specify the resource identifier as FCM preference. FCM preference. Now specify the value for it. It is better to use the application package name. Copy this one. Now specify the value as FCM preference. Now I need another string resource, so copy this one. Change the identifier into FCM token. Now change the value into FCM token. Now go to the service class. Here start some variable for shared preference. Get application context dot get shared preference. First parameter, specify the key for the shared preference. So r.string dot FCM preference. Now specify the opening mode, context dot mode private. Okay, here the first parameter need to be a string. This is an integer. So call the method called getString. Now specify the resource r.string dot FCM preference. Okay, now we have to get an editor for the shared preference. So shared preference dot editor, shared preference dot edit. Now we have to save the data to the shared preference. So editor dot put put string. Specify the key for the data. Get string r dot string dot FCM token. Now specify the data. Here the data available on this variable called the recent token. Now perform commit, editor.commit. Okay, now here the shared preference available on the data available on shared preference. Now go to activity main.xml, add a button here. Okay, change label into sent reg token. Okay, now go to main activity.java class file. Create some variables for button. Now initialize that variable. Button equal to first typecast that one into button. Now find it. Find the view by id r.id.button. Okay, now the click listener for the button.set on click listener. So from here we have to send the registration token to the application server. So I copy this shared preference. Okay, and paste it here. Okay, now we have to get the registration token from the shared preference. So string token shared preference dot get string. Specify the key for the data. Get string r dot string dot FCM token. Now specify the default value. Okay, now here we need to create a string request. So before that we need to specify the server URL. So string app server URL. Specify the URL HTTP. Specify the IP address. So here I use an Android virtual device. That's why I use this IP 10.0.2.2. Now specify the folder name FCM test. Now specify the PHP script FCM insert.php. Okay, now here we need to start some volley string request. Equal to new string request. First specify the request type. Here we use the HTTP post method. Now specify the server URL. Now you have to specify the listeners. First one is the response listener. Now you have to specify the error listener. And here you have to use one more method called getParams. Here we need to send some data to the server, so you have to override another method called getParams. First create some variable for map with key value pair string. Specify the variable name as params. New hash map. Now put the data params dot put. Specify the key and data. Specify the key as FCM token. Now specify the data. Here the data available on this variable called a token. Now return params from here. Return that parameter, return params. Now we need to add the string request to the request queue. So my singleton dot get instance main activity dot this. Now add the request queue. So add it to request queue and pass the string request. Okay. So if your application in the foreground, in order to receive a notification, you have to create a service that extends Firebase messaging service. So create a new Java class with the class name FCM messaging service. And that extends Firebase messaging service. Here you need to override a method called onMessageReceived. Whenever your application in the foreground, you will receive a notification and data within this method called onMessageReceived. So get the title and body of the notification. So remote message dot get notification dot get title. Now get the body of notification, string message, remote message dot get notification dot get body. So now here I am going to create our own notification. So here I add a notification, create some indent variable with the main activity dot class, set a flag for the indent, create a pending indent, create a notification combat builder. By using that builder, we can set properties for the notification, like we set the title for the notification, we set the content text, we set a small icon and auto cancel into true, and content indent, and create some notification manager class. And by using that notification manager, we display the notification. Okay. So now go to Android manifest.xml. So here we have to add the service. We have to add the service inside the manifest file. So add the first service with the class name Firebase instance ID service. Now specify an indent filter for the service. Specify an action name for the indent filter. Here you need to use the action name as com.google.firebase instance IT event. So copy this one. This is the action name for the instance ID service. Okay, now we need to add the another service, the messaging service. So copy this service and paste it here. Now change the class name, change the Android name into Firebase FCM messaging service. And we have to specify the action name. Here the action name is Firebase messaging event. So copy this one. And change it here. Okay, so now we have to set the internet permission for the application. We have to send FCM registration token to the application server. So we need the internet permission. So add the internet permission for the application. Users permission internet. Okay, so now we finish the coding of the application. Now we can test it. So start some virtual device. So for testing this application, you need a real Android device with the Google Play service installed or an Android virtual device with the Google API. So here is a virtual device with the Google API. So start that virtual device. So here is the virtual device. So now the application available on this virtual device. So first we have to send the registration token to the application server. So here is our server. Here is the database. Now there is no data available on the table. Now here we are going to send registration token to the application server. So click this button. Now refresh the table. Okay, now the registration token available on the table. Now we can send the push notification using that simple HTML form. So before going to send the push notification, here I'm going to make sure that the application is in the background. So now here the application in the background. Now we can start the notification. So open that simple HTML form. So you can send the notification using this simple HTML form. So here you need to specify title for the notification. So app server says. Now you have to specify the message for notification. Good morning. Now submit. And here it is. Now here we got a notification on the device. So here the notification title is app server says and the message is good morning. So if you click that one, it will open the default, that means the launcher activity. So here there is only one activity, that is the main activity. So now here the application is in the foreground. Now here I'm going to send another notification, good evening, and send it. And here we got the notification. Here the notification title app server says, message is good evening. So if you click it, again it opened the main activity.java file. So this is how we send push notification from your app server using Firebase cloud messaging. I hope you understand the concepts. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.